On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
That's the sound of a video from mid-January showing several Red Cross ambulances driving through sand dunes somewhere between Gaza and Israel. And the caption reads, "Red Cross finally shows up to inspect hostages after 67,884,990 wrong turns." Well, as you can tell, it's not from CNN or a mainstream media outlet, although with some of the real anti-Israel headlines these days, you might have to check just to be sure. It's actually a post on the Daily Brine, a Canadian satirical news website created after October 7th by brothers Ryan and Eric Turkienicz of Toronto, as their way to comment on the very unfunny circumstances facing the Jewish people right now in Israel and around the world. That post is one of hundreds. And here are some of their other headlines. Quote, "Jewish Voice for Peace, excited to decolonize Shavuot," as soon as someone explains to them what Shavuot is. Here's another one. "Columbia University to create new concentration camps for Jews to help them feel safe." They've talked about the exploding pagers, too. They've even made awards for the celebrity who hates Israel the most. But behind the absurd comedy of some of their headlines, the brothers' tone also turned solemn when they mourned the kidnapping and murders of the Bibas children and their mother. Their posts go on their Daily Brine website and also on Instagram, where they've amassed over 18,000 followers. They're on other social media platforms too, which is why they have put a disclaimer on the material to explain that it is satire, not the truth. Although their posts sometimes say what some of us dared to think in private.
We're wearing it on our sleeves. We're not pretending like we're saying real things and then, like some people do, when they get called out, they go, "Oh, it was satire," as a defense mechanism. No, we're out there at the beginning saying, this is satire. This is made up. These are exaggerations, with the understanding that but there's truth behind it. There's a comment, there's an opinion, there's a point of view behind it that we hope you get out.
I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, March the 13th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Jews around the world are marking the annual festival of Purim beginning Thursday evening, where folks dress up in costumes, make merry, read the Book of Esther, and perform hilarious skits, all to remember how the Jews were saved from genocide in Persia 2,500 years ago. And so we thought it was a perfect time for you to meet the two creators of the Daily Brine. Eric Turkienicz is a lawyer by profession. He does half the writing, using his comedy skills honed as a graduate of the Second City Comedy Academy. Ryan works in real estate investment, and he does all the graphics and the social media posting. Their website is called The Daily Brine because it sounds like a newspaper, like The Onion or The Beaverton, but also brings a Jewish flavor, like Jewish-style kosher pickles, because their motto is salty like the Dead Sea, sweet like the Jordan River. They do hard news, but they also put U.S. President Donald Trump issuing an executive order outlining sweet gefilte fish. Now, with more than 20,000 followers across Instagram and Twitter, the brothers have grown this part-time hustle to the point that they were invited to meet the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, just a few days ago. Eric and Ryan Turkienicz join me now. Welcome to the CJN Daily, guys.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming on our show, and congratulations on the Daily Brine. Our listeners may not have heard about it, but I was very lucky to have a little relative who told us about it. One of your members of your Turkienicz clan is our rabbi at my synagogue in Toronto.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I hear that story a lot, that someone told them about what we're doing. And like that, organically, word's getting around.
Well, you're up to 18,000 plus followers on Instagram. So what were you when you started besides you two and your friends and mom and what have you?
And our 18,000th follower was none other than Ellin Levy, the former spokesperson of the state of Israel. So
that's cool.
That's a good sign.
A little late, but better late than never, right? Because you probably followed him like a year ago.
It's fashionably late. Everyone knows you don't join an Instagram page until they hit at least 15,000. So,
who is the group? Who follows you? Is it mostly the Jewish community echo chamber? And I say that in a nice way, but yeah, who does follow you?
I think it's a good mix, and that's actually why a lot of people have taken notice, because even in a small way, we have broken out of the echo chamber. It's obviously mostly Jews. I would imagine even up to 80%. I often get messages from people from the Indian community, from the Christian community, even some Arabs. I had a Jordanian fellow message me saying, like, thank you for doing this. You're bringing some levity to the situation, and we really do agree with what you're saying. So where there's smoke, there's fire. We're breaking out of the echo chamber a little bit, and we want to keep that going.
But that's amazing. Isn't that what you want to do, is create some connection as opposed to all the yelling?
One of the things that inspired this thing to begin was seeing what was out there already. And a lot of it was very divisive. You would have, even among the Jewish voices out there, you'd have people out there going to one side or the other at a very extreme point where it didn't matter what the point of view was. It doesn't matter. We're right because we're right because we're right. And then you just have yelling and name calling. There was room for a voice of like, hold on, let's take a step back. Let's talk at a kind of light level about why we think we're right about this stuff and why we think the other side might be wrong. And people, again, outside that echo chamber have clued into it because they didn't like seeing the I'm right, yeah, you are right, and then swear words and things like that. They liked seeing honest takes about it and insightful takes on it.
Are there other competitors, or I guess people that are doing this kind of work in the Jewish field and also in the non-Jewish field? I mean, I know the Beaverton, you write for the Beaverton, but I'm talking about specifically October 7th type stuff around the world, and not like the Israeli Saturday Night Live show, which is a whole other thing.
Well, should we start with just like a basic description of what it is, where we're essentially a satire news page making satirical made-up headlines in the vein of The Onion or the Babylon Bee, but specifically to fight anti-Semitism or promote a pro-Israel point of view, or even just promote confidence in the Jewish community by talking about our holidays and our culture and having our people be seen. It existed in fits and starts, but we felt not from the same perspective that we have. Yeah, so people were already doing it, but we felt that a lot of what was happening, especially on the Hasbara side of things, was not as effective as it could be. We felt it could be made simpler. It could be made punchier, and it also could be made funnier. And so that's, I think, where our secret sauce came into it.
There was an unfortunate pattern, especially immediately after October 7th for sure, but before as well, where the Hasbara movement or the pro-Israel movement, or however you want to call it, some of the voices were mean. I don't know how else to say it, but they would go to an extreme length to target people who perhaps didn't need to be targeted, simply as an effort to prove that they were right. And some of the voices out there were like that. And we thought there was room for a slightly more centrist voice that took some of the volume out of it. And in comedy, there's a concept of punching up or punching down. And we didn't want to punch down. We didn't want to start writing all these things, blasting people who were suffering in the Palestinian territories. We didn't want to blast people who were suffering on any side of the equation. We wanted to target the people who were in power, or the people who had the loudest voices in the room, and approach the hypocrisy that they were putting into things. The politicians, the loudest voices in the progressive movements, people like the UN, people like groups like Hamas, of course, and say, these are the targets we need to focus on. Celebrating a Jewish victory because they've bombed a place was not helpful and frankly is not right. Talking about these are the people who are actively causing the suffering, and these are the people we should be focused on, that's the approach we wanted to take.
Is that the more polite Canadian brand that you can add to the conversation? Because, for example, there are Michael Rappaport, Tiffany Haddish, there's all other Jewish comedians doing, quote, hasbara, but they're American or, and you guys are, I think, maybe the only ones.
I think it's part and parcel more of the news voice rather than the Canadian voice, where if we maintain our objectivity, where everything we say is backed by a verifiable story or a defensible opinion, that'll allow our own people to trust us and people on the other side to at least engage with what we're trying to say.
But your site says hashtag total satire, like warning, this is not a news site. This is not fake news almost. So explain why you just said that it's a news when it's not.
I mean, the underlying stories, of course, are real stories. We're not making up a story and then making fun of a made up story. There's no goal in that. There's no satire in that. So underlying it, there's a real event. What the satire is, what the made up part is, our take on it. We're either exaggerating something that really occurred, which of course the exaggeration is not correct, or pointing out some hypocrisy in it, in the hope of bringing the attention to the original story and either how absurd it is or how untrue it is. And readers, whether they agree with us at the beginning or not, are at least thinking that there's another point of view and one that is based in rationality as opposed to just shouting and screaming and yelling.
Right. Like, for example, the one we're talking a week after the first hostage release of this year, and the post you did about how the Red Cross got lost 6 million times before it could actually find the first hostages was brilliant, but also sad, because it's what the Jewish world has been complaining about with broken hearts. Can you walk us through how that particular post came to be and how you decide the tone of that so quickly after the actual release?
I think it's an example of what I mentioned before, which is who's the target here. You have a hostage release. It's with some points of view, a wonderful, wonderful thing that's happening. Everyone loves seeing them return, but it's bittersweet because of things that are surrounding it. And then in the midst of it, you had the Red Cross show up and take them, and they're prominently in the photos, and their symbol is there. And we knew that throughout there were a lot of criticisms about, hey, where were you guys? And, this is the classic guy shows up at the last minute to take credit for something that they had absolutely no real role in.
But their Uber rating is sky high. I think it's 5.0, if not, 4.9, something.
They only done 2 rides, though.
Small sample size.
And would you say that was trolling or satire? How do you define the levels?
Trolling is when you're just straight up mocking somebody to just show that you hate them. If you're going to mock the Red Cross's appearance or just something about them, whereas the satire is when you're criticizing their action or their point of view. And I feel this was more on the side of satire.
We're not trying to get our jabs into particular people. We're trying to make a point out there, particularly in a landscape where the pro-Israel voices are often diminished or made to feel of less value than the anti-Israel voices.
Right. It's hard to argue when someone calls you a baby killer. It kind of cuts the conversation off right there.
Yeah.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
It came to mind the Roberto Benigni film, Life is Beautiful, about the Holocaust, or the Anne Frank Instagram stories that came out maybe 2-3 years ago, where people were like, it's too soon. You can't do that. You can't joke about something so traumatic. What guidance or self-guidance do you have in your work so that you're sensitive to? Can you talk a little bit about, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because I've been involved in comedy for the better part of 26 or 27 years. I don't believe there's such a thing as too soon. It's a thing that's used a lot, But from an event perspective, there's no such thing as too soon. What is possibly too soon are certain points of view about the event. It is often harder to find a funny point of view about a certain event immediately after it happens, so much so that maybe it's not worth trying. That doesn't mean something is verboten, and there may be something you can say about it in certain circumstances.
When we're talking about the Holocaust.
Sure.
Yeah. Given what we've gone through as a people over our history, our humor can sometimes skew darker. So it's a joke that we make towards ourselves is sometimes okay, whereas someone doing it to us is not. Like even yesterday, Elon Musk came with a whole list of Nazi puns that in the context was unacceptable. But my comment about it saying that it's out of my comfort zone, well, that's kind of funny because it's a Jew saying it. And it's our voice about a trauma that happened to us. So I think there is a little bit of nuance.
So maybe if I could respond, you're taking ownership of this.
Taking it back.
As opposed to letting somebody else define what.
Exactly.
Because, for example, you called him Lefty Sinwar, and that was crazy. It was funny. If you're a Palestinian who thinks that he's the hero, they're not going to like that. But I just thought that was funny. You can punch up and down on this guy. Why would you want to punch up on him anyway? Punch down. We want you to punch down. He's dead and he's a murderer.
It's my perspective. You can't punch down on the leader of a terrorist organization. I mean, this is a person whose entire existence has been to project power and project superiority and dominance over both his own people and other people. You can't punch down on someone who is claiming a high status role.
Okay, so you have different rules for different like politicians, whatever.
There's some people who, regardless of what it is, they're fair targets for mockery and satire and whatever you want to call it.
Have you taken on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
At the beginning, there was just total solidarity even within the government, and there was pretty much an agreement not to attack each other because the threat from outside was existential. And I think that's even continued up until now. So we've done some light jabs against him, but we haven't gotten involved in the more divisive internal politics quite yet, just because the war was still ongoing. We also got into this to be a bit of a unifying voice. We have a dual goal of getting our point across to the other side, but also building confidence and building common culture within the Jewish people.
Not that it's not a valid target. It's absolutely a valid target, and there's certain things that even the most diehard supporters would criticize them for doing. In the meantime, however, the world has provided us with many, many other targets we thought were more worthy.
What's your biggest successful, I guess, viral story that you've done? Do you know?
Yeah. So early on, we posted one. I think the headline was UN condemns Hamas for lack of handrails. And it was a picture of a Hamas tunnel descending into darkness. And it looked very hazardous. Like you could fall and hurt yourself.
Health and safety rules type of thing.
Yeah, it was just at that moment where, the UN had done nothing, had said nothing, and was borderline supportive in their inaction to Hamas, and it struck a nerve. And it really started circulating on all the group chats, all the forums, all the different Jewish message groups. And that was, I think, where I guess the broader community took notice of us.
And it's still to this day, it boggles the mind what the UN is doing and saying about certain things.
There was another one that went semi-viral and also kind of people thought it was a real news story. It was when Israel had rescued the Bedouin Arab hostage. And the headline Eric came up with was, CNN requires reporter to find most cynical angle possible on hostage release, something like that. And so I made a mock CNN breaking news headline that says, Israel puts Arab man in hospital. And it's a photo of the rescued hostage smiling with his son, but that's the headline. And it went semi-viral on Twitter because people thought it was an example of what CNN would really do.
That's what happened. So it's brilliant. Yeah. Has this work changed your views at all? Or have you, and I'm going to use the word journey because I think that's true, since you started to do this, about what it's like to be Jewish in this time of our lives?
October 7th made me angrier as a Jewish person than I have felt as a Jewish person in a very, very long time. And I struggled myself how to do that because I was find myself just, in a normal work day or out socially, and I couldn't get certain things out of my mind months and months after. Like, this is something that stuck and still sticks with me. And I wrestled with how to do that. This, of all things, has been an outlet for dealing with some of those emotions because I didn't know how to process it. I wasn't the kind of person who would post 20,000 inspirational quotes on Facebook and that's how I dealt with it, or who would get into online arguments with people and that's how I dealt with it. It wasn't me, but I've been in comedy for a long time. And that was a good outlet for me to say, here's me expressing not only my feelings about it, but in a way that that I felt good about, that I felt productive about.
Now it's become the reason to get up in the morning and keep doing this.
When I look at some of the stories and then I see 150 comments on them, most of which are from people who say thank you and I'm feeling the same way, or riff on the joke, that makes me feel good.
It also was a wake-up call for me to realize that Jewish life is in our generation's hands now. And if we don't kind of step into those shoes, things might get worse. And so people talk about October 8th Jews, but I don't really look at it that way. I think it's just regular Jews who've realized it takes work, it takes effort to build culture, to build community, and to build an actual nation and a country. And people are stepping up to kind of get activated and do whatever work they can. That's kind of how it worked for me.
And you're doing this, thank you. And you're doing this when a lot of Jewish artists are being canceled in the artistic world, in the comedy world, in the show world, in the comic book writing world. Miriam Leibecki, all the same names that we're going to, it's difficult now for being Jewish in the arts. So, I mean, how does what you do kind of fit in, if at all?
It's hard to navigate. Anyone who is in that world has heard people who they've probably been associating with for years, or friends or things, say things that have taken them aback. And, sometimes you feel like you can't say certain things because that industry or that professional sphere will suddenly turn against you in a way you don't want. So people have to keep things on the down low. The goal we're trying to do is to try and normalize a pro-Israel, or even better, an anti-Israel voice out there and say, okay, we see you guys dominating the media with all that stuff about how evil Israel is, as you say. Well, here is the respectful dissent. And we want to normalize that, where you can say that stuff, even disagree with other people and have them still exist without being, I don't like the word canceled, without being targeted, without feeling like you're ostracized.
Have you personally become the targets of hatred?
I mean, online, there's the typical trolling comments, although I do find we get it less than a lot of the other social media accounts who are more inflammatory. We're not. Me personally, I mean, I got back from a vacation to find a keffiyeh on my lawn one day. That could have been because there's a big mezuzah on my door, the only one in my neighborhood, or it could be because someone figured out who I was, because it's not a big secret. It could be the general milieu of anti-Semitism going around. Could have been nothing, just a rogue keffiyeh flying around. Or it could have been related to this work. I really don't know.
Can you discuss the merch that you have, especially I'll say it, and I'm going to get an explicit rating now, but whatever. It's in Hebrew, it's FAFO, FAFO, fuck around and find out, in Hebrew lettering. Tell me about that security patch. Like, who buys it? Is it really for the military? These are all the things that I saw. I would buy it, but
it's we call it a morale patch, right? It's and in a very simple way, it's also Israel's foreign policy, where if you cross this line, you're going to find out the full force of the IDF. People liked it. It went semi-viral among soldiers, both Israeli and American. Once they found out what it means, and that most people can't decipher what it means, there became an appetite for it.
I heard
You don't
a
know if
rumor.
anybody's actually wearing it in battle, though.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's approved by the actual IDF. I think it's more for in the barracks just to have fun with the boys. But I did hear a rumor that somebody gave one of them to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, and he has it up on his wall of military patches. I don't know if they explained to him what it means. That's the rumor that I heard when I was in DC.
And that's sourced from one of our articles. I mean, the origin was one of the posts that had that as the official policy.
Yeah, no, Israel appoints new minister of FAFO to explain foreign policy to neighboring militants, you know.
Okay, and you're going to Israel for the first ever annual meeting of the Voices of the People. Will that change what you're doing, or it's a separate thing?
It's separate but connected because, you know, through what we've been doing with the Daily Brine, I've met like-minded comedians and just funny people on social media. That's evolving into a quasi-activist group that I'm calling Ironic Dome. And so it feels like we're slowly uniting, we're slowly building institutions, and we're slowly figuring out what the next phase of advocacy, if you want to call it, is going to look like.
Well, we'll check back in with you when you get back, because obviously Israel needs all the help they can get in Hasbara. They haven't succeeded so far. So if they can get some Ironic Dome people to figure out a better way, kol hakavod, all power to you.
Thank you.
Thanks
so much, Ellin.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. Thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Our show is produced by Zachary Kauffman. The executive producer is Michael Fraiman. The managing editor, Mark Weisblatt. And the music by Dov Beck-Levine. Wishing everyone a happy Purim, and thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.